Welcome to Channel's Business Globe with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, a combination of currency depreciation, economic challenges in Nigeria, limited access to foreign exchange and high living costs here in the UK have collectively contributed to Nigerian students struggling to pay their tuition fees to British institutions. Toyin Adelodun, a personal development coach, will be joining me from Swansea in Wales to relay the plight of the students he speaks with on a regular basis. And the Speaker of the House of Commons is facing significant calls to resign from office after being accused of breaking parliamentary protocol to help the Labour Party avoid a rebellion over calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. Our Downing Street correspondent Simon Pusey will soon be joining me here in the studio for an update on the unprecedented turn of events. Then later, in a bid to foster innovation and boost economic growth, the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, or MOFI, gathered prominent business leaders from across the country for the highly anticipated Public Wealth Management Roundtable. Channel's Business Global has obtained some exclusive footage, and I'll be sharing that with you all shortly. But first, let's begin the show by taking a look at what's been trending on social media platforms this week. And we begin with LinkedIn. It's been precisely 2 weeks since the world lost one of Nigeria's brightest minds following the tragic death of Herbert Wigwe, the former managing director of Access Bank. In this post from economic think tank Enterprise NGR, which is chaired by Igboje Imokwade, a previous Access Bank chairman, the group praised Wigwe for his unwavering commitment to the success of the financial and professional services sector across the country. And on X, the Evening Standard are reporting that economists suggest the UK's shallow recession is already over and that inflation, currently at 5.1%, will reach 0% sometime soon. The accompanying article cites the closely watched S&P Global Flash PMI data, which hit a 9-month high in February at 53.3, comfortably ahead of the 50 mark that represents stagnation. Then finally, this from Boston News on Facebook. On Thursday, a cellular outage across the United States was experienced by some users of AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon and other network users, according to the website downdetector.com, which tracks such reports. AT&T had by far the most, with more than 30,000 customers telling the site that they had no service. It seems services have since been resumed. On Wednesday, King Charles III and Rishi Sunak met in person for their first audience since His Majesty's cancer diagnosis. The monarch, 75, held a meeting with the Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace to discuss matters of government as part of his first face-to-face official duties since his medical condition was made public. To other British news, the Speaker of the House of Commons is facing significant calls to resign from office after being accused of breaking parliamentary protocol to help the Labour Party avoid a rebellion over calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. Over 50 members of Parliament have signed a motion declaring no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Though non-binding, the high number is alarming as his position depends on retaining broad support. According to media reports, the Speaker is not planning to resign and will continue to conduct business as usual in the face of mounting pressure. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, yet another extraordinary week from the Palace of Westminster. I think we always knew it would be a heated debate because, of course, we were speaking about whether or not there should be an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And there was to be a vote on that. There was no vote. And in an unprecedented turn of events, now I think it's pretty fair to say most MPs from across the House want the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, to resign. It's very complicated, but pretty serious allegations against him. Can you explain how this story has changed from there being peace to being war, but within Westminster?
Yeah, well, what I think we should start by doing is putting the Gaza situation aside,
yes,
because unfortunately, what happened, earlier really does overshadow what has happened here in the political world, which is very sad because this was never supposed to be about politics. It always was, unfortunately, about politics. It was never supposed to be about it, but it has turned into, and this is very British as well. What has happened is incredibly British. You see in other parliaments around the world when there's things like this, there's fisticuffs, and we love watching, the punch-ups that happen in other places, well, this is a British version of fisticuffs, isn't it? People walking out, people saying the Right Honourable should.
Shouting.
It is very, very British what happened yesterday. And it's all about convention and tradition, and it is quite confusing. And a lot of these rules, I think, should be changed. But because we're British and this goes back hundreds of years, of course we won't. So let's quickly explain it. So the third largest party in the Commons, that's the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party. They're entitled to 3 opposition days in Parliament every session, letting them pick the topic to be debated. This is their kind of moment to shine, their chance to prove that they have significance within Parliament, even though they only have a couple of MPs. And this was one of those days. The party chose the Israel-Hamas war, laying down a motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. Now, the problem with that for the Labour Party is that quite a few Labour MPs agree with the SNP motion, agree with that. Exactly, and would have voted for that, and that would have left Sir Keir Starmer with a bit of an issue that his own MPs are voting with another party, another opposition party. So Parliamentary Convention says that if a motion has been put forward by an opposition party like the SNP, it cannot be amended by another opposition party. It can be by the government, but on this occasion, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who is he's the Speaker of the House, he's the person who sits at the end and says, order, order, and he sort of controls the House and makes sure there is order. He decided, against all precedents for hundreds of years, that the Labour amendment, that Labour could amend this motion.
He's a former Labour MP.
And he's a former Labour MP.
That's a big part of this.
He said his decision was because he wanted everyone to have a voice, he wanted to have a variety of views, he wanted everyone to be able to have a say on a very significant topic.
And safety.
And he's talking about MP safety, so we've seen a couple of MPs murdered in the last few years. A lot are quitting at the moment because they feel unsafe over this exact issue, especially because there's so much emotion and exactly. And so he was saying that was the reason. Actually, we're hearing now in the hours after this has happened that he may have sat down with Labour whips who told him that under a Labour government they wouldn't back him as being Speaker of the House unless he did exactly what he did. So he broke with all tradition, hundreds of years of tradition, to change something. And Sir Lindsay Hoyle really sort of prides himself on being very good with protocol and convention, knowing all the ins and outs of this crazy sort of traditional.
He's not Berko.
No, so this was quite a big departure from what he usually does. You see the government walking out, the SNP saying this is an absolute disgrace, this was their big moment and it was taken away from him. And then he stands up and, very close to tears, apologises to everyone that he's let down. And now we've got letters going in. Of course, it's letters in the UK, again, very traditional, and saying that he needs to resign. So we're not sure there yet what's happened, but we've got over 60 letters have gone in now. He's apologised. He says he's going to have meetings with the various parties over the next few days. But I cannot, emphasise enough how British this is for the rest of the world watching this, seeing people, walking out of the chamber. That's the most, the biggest thing we can do. Wow, we showed them. And unfortunately, again, you could make the argument that actually President, Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the leaders of Hamas are not going to pay much attention to what the British Parliament says in a vote, which is completely inconsequential, really, to what's happening in Gaza and Israel. But it just shows kind of that this is all about party politics, isn't it? And it's kind of people trying to get one up on the opposition and things. And I don't think it was a very edifying day for UK Parliament or UK government, because
and that's saying something, because there have been.
Well, we've seen a lot.
We've seen a lot. It's another dramatic week in Westminster. Keep us updated. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Nigerian students form one of the largest groups of international students here in the UK, pursuing a wide range of academic disciplines, including but not limited to business, engineering, medicine, law, social sciences and humanities. Tuition fees for international students, including those from Nigeria, tend to be far higher than for domestic students in the UK. And a perfect storm of the Naira depreciation, limited access to foreign exchange and high living costs here in Britain have collectively contributed to Nigerian students struggling to pay their tuition fees. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Toyin Adelodun, a personal development coach who joins me from Swansea in Wales. Toyin Adelodun, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. And I will just say to our viewers that there may be some disruption during this discussion because you have, of course, been embarking on a university tour across the United Kingdom, offering your services and advice to Nigerian students who are studying here, which is why you are the appropriate person to talk about the hot topic of the week, which is the rapid depreciation of the Naira. It's fallen dramatically in the past 6 months. Not just people at home are concerned. We too in the diaspora are concerned, particularly international students, of course, because they've got to pay their school fees using Naira. How have they been coping? What have you been hearing today?
Thank you so much, Juliana, for having me. A very, very important discussion. I must tell you, it is a very, very tough time for a lot of international students, particularly from Nigeria. A lot of plans are in disarray at the moment in terms of expecting money from home. I mean, I'm just here in Swansea. I've been speaking to a couple of students in university here, and it is destabilizing. Like, they can't really plan forward, and you have a situation where universities are requesting for repayment in terms of installment payments, and students are scrambling, trying to call home. It is not a great time, I must tell you. In the last 6 months, we've seen a very, very sharp fall in the Naira, and I'm afraid a lot of students will have to drop out of school. I am afraid. I'm seeing the signs of that.
Goodness me, school dropouts, that's quite alarming. I wanted to ask, because of course we know there are differences in, students in terms of their social, economic backgrounds. A lot of our viewers who are watching, perhaps, they were fortunate enough to be able to pay for their children to study abroad. Not everybody is like that. We have a lot of mature students who are funding their own higher education. Are you seeing that difference play out when you are going throughout the country? So, of course, there are some students who are complaining but can still cope, whereas, as you said, there are others who are at serious risk of falling out because the exchange rate is just completely absurd at the moment.
Yes, it is a challenge. And as you have rightly said, there are some people that were able to pay their fees well in advance before now. So those kind of people are just kind of managing with living expenses, trying to make it as good as they can get. But there are some people that are taking huge financial sacrifice to be here. Some of them have left their job. Some of them sold their small property to make this work. Some of them have come here with family, partners and children, and they are getting money from home. Some of them have used, let's say they left a job after a while, they got paid a lump sum, and they are bringing down the money bit by bit. I've met people that have businesses back home, and it is their business that is literally funding their lifestyle here. And presently, the money coming from home, I mean, this morning, I was looking at the exchange rate, £1 was going to about 2,200. That is totally out of plan for so many people here. And like I said, I'm afraid we are getting to a situation where the schools will have to, this more often than not, you see a situation where if you don't pay, the school takes off the sponsorship. And when the school takes off the sponsorship, the Home Office writes you a letter to leave the country. That is the kind of situation that we are having with some students presently.
What advice would you give to people who are trying to, stay, anxious-free, shall we say? Not just students, but of course we know, Jakpa, I haven't used that word this year on this show yet, first time. But, there are a lot of people that do still want to come and work, live and study in the UK. How are they going to be able to do it?
I think one of the first things we have to look at historically is how far we have come with these rates. I mean, when I moved here around 2008, we are talking about getting a flight ticket to the UK for around 100,000 Naira.
Wow.
£1 was around 200, 250. So that's just 16 years ago. And what are we looking at now? We are looking at almost times 9, times 10 of that. So what options do young people have that are striving? The first option is to try and see if you can get a scholarship. There's a program presently going on with British Council. There's a scholarship that they are putting forward. I mean, the Chevening Scholarship, the MasterCard Scholarship. There are a lot of scholarships in the US if you do the GRE and the GMAT. The Erasmus Mundus Scholarship is there. So the first way to get around cost is to try and look for scholarship.
Yeah.
Be it a full scholarship or be it a partial scholarship. That's the first option. And then the second option will be to try cheaper countries. There are a lot of countries that you can still go on the cheap rather than come to the United Kingdom. That is the option that people are having to look at presently. It has always been there, but this exchange rate thing has now made it literally UK is really out of reach. I mean, for the middle class, it is now for the ultra wealthy now.
Thank you so much for your expertise and time, Toyin Adelodun, who is a personal development coach, as well as many other hats. You don't just do social media talks, you also have a job, pretty successful job here in the UK. Thank you, Toyin. In a moment, I'll be sharing highlights from Tuesday's Public Wealth Management Roundtable, hosted by the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. But until then, here's a breakdown of some of the biggest news stories of the week. The world's 5 largest listed oil companies have made profits of more than $250 billion since Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to a dramatic increase in energy prices and household bills. According to Global Witness, BP, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil and Total Energies have made $281 billion since the war began in February 2022. Since this time, the 5 companies have paid $200 billion to shareholders, including an unprecedented $111 billion in 2023 alone. US President Joe Biden has written to 153,000 student loan borrowers, informing them that their debts, totaling $1.2 billion have been forgiven. Last year, his administration pledged to find other avenues for tackling debt relief after the Supreme Court blocked a broader plan to forgive $430 billion in student loan debt during the summer. According to the White House, Biden has now cancelled an estimated $138 billion in student debt for nearly 3.9 million people. BuzzFeed has announced plans to cut 16% of its workforce amid a challenging environment. The new layoffs come almost a year after the media group shed its staff by 15% and shut down BuzzFeed News, focusing all of its news content in HuffPost. Wednesday's announcement also said that it would sell Complex, the youth culture media company it bought 3 years ago, to a live stream shopping platform for $108.6 million, plus an additional $5.7 million earmarked for office and severance costs. BuzzFeed said the cash proceeds from the sale of Complex will let it take meaningful steps towards strengthening its balance sheet and improving liquidity. Now to my final topic. On Tuesday, the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, or MOFI, gathered prominent business leaders from across the country for the highly anticipated Public Wealth Management Roundtable. The event, which was graced by His Excellency the Vice President Kashim Shettima, was held at the Congress Hall of the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja.
The 8-point agenda of this administration kickstarted our journey of renewed hope and clearly articulated the direction of travel of our administration. Since our inauguration, we have made economic revitalization a top priority of the administration. At the core of this is ensuring optimal management of the assets and investments of the federal government towards unlocking their revenue potential. This includes our bold and achievable plan to double the GDP growth rate and significantly increase the GDP base over the next 8 years. 3 key priorities are at the forefront of this agenda. Firstly, we must focus on increasing economic growth by investing in key sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. Secondly, we must work to create more jobs for our citizens, particularly for our young people and women. And thirdly, we must attract more investment capital to Nigeria to support our growth and development. More recently, the federal government set a goal to raise at least $10 billion in order to increase foreign exchange liquidity, a key ingredient to stabilize the Naira and grow the economy. At the heart of these goals is the imperative to expeditiously mobilize resources.
As was mentioned earlier, yes, the immense potential has been there. It was there at the beginning of Murphy's initial initiation, I may say, in 1959. But the global economic landscape is evolving rapidly, and our reliance on oil has made fiscal stability, fiscal sustainability a continued pursuit. We acknowledge the historical challenges: budget deficits, inefficient public spending, infrastructure gaps, socioeconomic inequalities, and suboptimal utilization of national assets. The CEO has said all these things before. So let us chart this new course. Under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he is committed to reversing the trajectory of the nation. He is implementing bold fiscal reforms, amongst others, diversifying our revenue base, enhancing transparency and accountability, and prioritizing investments.
Before coming here, and before the event, we had a number of expectations. The first one is really to get to meet our stakeholders, our representative of our stakeholders. As you know, Ministry of Finance Incorporated, MOFI, is the trustee or the custodian of assets that belong to over 220 million Nigerians. So we have a responsibility to engage our stakeholders, to engage members of the public, to render account of what we are doing. So that was the first, to really engage with the stakeholders, with the public, to render account of our stewardship. That was the first. The second is really to get some feedback from the public and from Nigerians as to what their expectations are, as to what type of institution they're expecting MOFI to become. That's the second. And the third is really around the fact that we need to be able to identify partners and those service providers that we believe are instrumental in us delivering on our mandate, because we're going to require a lot of services from them. And we had the opportunity of meeting many of them to really understand what their expectations are. So those are some of the expectations. And I believe that at the end of the day, I believe that we're quite happy with the extent to which these expectations have been met. Well, I think the first thing really from our perspective is the fact that, one, is that we really need to, we've started the work to establish what Nigeria actually owns. You know, a lot of the times we lament a lot about what we owe as a nation, but we rarely talk about what we own. This is a very asset-rich nation across different asset classes. Whether you're talking about companies we have invested in resources into, or we own shares in, or you're talking about our oil and gas assets, you're talking about solid mineral assets, our real estate assets, both domestic as well as offshore assets, our infrastructure assets, our airports, our seaports, our motorways or highways, or you talk about issues around intellectual property or software issues, forest assets, marine assets. It's an asset-rich nation. And when you consider what we own versus what we owe, we are in a positive position. But we need to establish what we own and put figures to that. And by the time we do that, we believe that access to those resources will help address some of the challenges that we're facing, particularly economically. We believe that those assets can be used to unlock liquidity and address some of the FX challenges that we're facing. Some of our companies can be used to invest in priority sectors of the economy and make a difference. And hopefully that will change our story, it will change our narrative. And so from our perspective, those are some of the things that we believe that we as MOFI can contribute in bringing about the prosperity of Nigeria and of Nigerians.
Okay, I'm here, I guess, first and foremost as a Nigerian. A subject like this should interest any Nigerian. How our Commonwealth is being managed under a new, call it reinvigorated MOFI. But perhaps more importantly, as Group CEO for Nigerian Exchange Group, one of our companies, the Exchange, is also particularly keen to make sure that we can get more companies in the MOFI portfolio of assets closer to many of the infrastructure companies that we own and oversee. So whether they're listings directly on the Exchange or they're more sort of financing support for MOFI across broader financial markets are some of the things that we care about. I'm not sure that 1 year is the good sort of horizon. But I was particularly pleased listening to the CEO of MOFI, listening to the chairman of MOFI, listening to the vice president who represented Mr. President, you know, that they've got very aggressive material plans to grow AUM, aggressive plans around governance of the assets that they oversee, and aggressive plans around partnership with the private sector.
We know we are the largest enterprise in Africa. But we also know that we could also be the largest dividend-paying company in Africa. And well, it's work in progress, but we know that in not too long time, this company will be the highest dividend-paying company in Africa. And perhaps more importantly, it could be a company that will be essentially listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange by other stock exchanges, because it will be worth the while. It will have the clear governances and processes. It will also have all the compliances that every business like our one requires to do this. So we're already there today. We're a paperless company, and that says a lot about all our decisions are on electronic platform. And beyond this, we know that this company is on a trajectory of massive success. So we're happy to be here.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I will see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.